we have many stories about marijuana use. One of them is everybody piles into a little Volkswagen Bug and they smoke all this pot and they're worried that they're going to get the people that are just ingesting the smoke are worried that they're going to get positive on a drug test. Well, there's a thing that's called a cutoff level. And the reason that there's a cutoff level on all your drugs is because the scientists have figured out what they consider environmental contamination. So let's assume that you work at a bank and you handle money all day long. You're going to absorb drugs and whatever else on your fingers at some point. But it should never be enough to where you would test positive on a drug test. The same thing with being in a room with someone that smokes. You should never have enough, you should never be able to ingest enough smoke to where you'd be positive on a drug test. More than likely, what would happen is you would be irritated and your eyes would water and you'd run out of the room because the smoke would be too much for you to handle. That is where the cutoff levels come from. So when we're talking about testing for drugs, we're not testing at zero. We're testing at a different level depending on what the drug is, depending on what the cutoff level is. So the scientists have figured out this is what we consider environmental exposure, anything below that. So we're not going to look at that. So it is possible to test for, if you did a zero cutoff, it is possible for you to have certain drugs in your system at a low level. And it could be from environmental exposure, but it would never be positive on the drug test. Now, having said that, when you start talking about children, especially babies, you want to do a zero cutoff because there should be no reason why a child should have any level of drugs in their body. So you want to make sure that you're doing a limit of detection or a zero limit of detection. And you also want to look for exposure. In hair testing, most of the time, they're going to wash the hair first before they put it into testing. But when you're looking at children, they will actually not wash the hair and they'll test it for exposure and they'll do a zero limit of detection. So when you get a drug test back and it says detected, that means that they've detected that drug in the system, and it may not be enough to be positive on an adult drug test, but that child should not have any drugs in them, which tells you that at some point they've been around it, they've ingested it, somehow or another it got in their system. As far as hair dye goes, that's been a story for a long time. Hair dye's changed. I can attest to that over the last 30 or 40 years. And how we dye our hair now is not how we used to dye it. Literally, if you were going to dye your hair and you were going to bleach it, and you would bleach it down to the scalp, if you bleached it, you would actually be stripping the color off of it. So in theory, you could bleach your hair and probably pass the drug test. However, nobody does that, because really, if you bleached your hair using just your average bleach and stripping all the color out of your hair would probably fall out of your head. That's not how we dye hair now. So most hair dyes are not going to mess with a hair drug test. The only thing that we look for as collectors is we look for, don't come in my office with wet hair, because that means you probably put some kind of shampoo or something on it, so I'm not going to test you. We look for, when we're pulling up your hair, we're looking for where the color starts and ends, so that we're trying to get where the root ends are, is probably, unless you just dye your hair every week, you're probably going to have some hair growth. So you're going to get the true amount of the drug that's coming out through the hair and not the colored part. So as collectors, we're very specific on how we're going to cut your hair and how we're going to process it. But in general, hair dye does not affect a drug test. Most of what everybody does, they'll go to their local head shop, whatever, in Memphis, let's say, and you buy this stuff that you drink, and then you come here within 4 hours and you urinate in a cup and you beat the drug test. And there's a lot of other ways to do it too. You can put iodine in your urine, and when you give me your cup, it's going to look normal, and 4 hours later it's going to turn brown. And the iodine supposedly strips it of all of its, components. Drug testing laboratories have gotten smart over the years, and they test for adulterants. They test for soaps, they test for, which they call surfactants. They test for adulterants, whether it's iodine or bleach or, whatever you can think of that you can drop in a urine cup. As collectors, when you come into our office to do a urine test, we're going to ask you to empty your pockets and lock all your belongings up so that we feel relatively sure that you're not going into the bathroom with anything. Only on very rare occasions will we observe someone urinate. It's not something we want to do. It's not something you want us to do. But if you are concerned about that, you can court order an observed collection. What an observed urine collection is you have to lift up your shirt, pull down your pants, turn around, we call it the hokey pokey, and show me that you don't have a prosthetic device or some type of a line taped against your leg that's got urine in it, or a condom with urine, or a baggie with urine, or whatever you got taped to your leg. And then from there, we have to actually watch the urine leave your body and hit the cup. So it's not fun. We don't like doing it. I actually charge more for it, and I pay my collectors that have to do that. There are very specific reasons to do that. Department of Transportation testing. If you've already failed a test and you come in for a return to duty or follow-up, we have to do it in those cases, but you can court order it. It is something, if you're concerned about that, put it in the court order that it has to be observed. It's going to cost you $25 more, but it's one way of knowing that person didn't bring anything in.
Okay, assuming the $25 is not a major expense for a particular couple in a custody dispute, why wouldn't a family lawyer want to insist on that?
People are very strange. They really don't want you to make them strip in front of you, which is basically what it feels like. You're lifting your shirt up, you're putting your pants down, you're turning around. People just in general don't want to be, it's almost like it's a violation. So most of the time, the goal is to get a drug test out of the person. If you put an observed collection on it, you may or may not get a drug test out of it. However, with a hair test, it's always observed because you're cutting their hair. So if you couldn't get the observed urine collection out of it, you could probably get the hair test out of it, and you could probably also get a saliva test out of it. So there's ways around that, but I would say I would always order an observed test because you don't know what the person's trying to bring in, especially if they don't know. Even though things are said in open court, unless you send me the court order, I don't really know what was said, and don't assume that your client's going to come in and tell me what they need to have done. Most of the time, they don't know what the order said either. They signed it, they said they understood it, but they don't know. They don't know why they're there, and I will absolutely run the wrong test if I don't know what you court ordered. Guarantee.